Hi, this is Robert Shear with another edition of Sheer Intelligence, where the intelligence comes from my guest. In this case, it's Ray McGovern, who I do every week. We have our weekly chat, two old guys from the Bronx who went different ways in life and now hooked up to try to enlighten each other and others. Ray was with the CIA for 27 years. He briefed or was involved in the briefing, daily brief of three presidents, Nixon, Ford, and Ronald Reagan. And I was criticizing the CIA. It's really funny with the release of the JFK files. Suddenly I'm reading my old journalism in those files that you guys thought was so dangerous and crazy, had to spy on me all the time. But leaving that aside, Ray was in the analysis side, not the classy, not the overthrow government side. I got to make that clear. But I really want to take us back to those days of the Vietnam War and everything, because it's 50 years, I think, to the day when those helicopters lifted up off the American embassy in Vietnam in what has been thought over the years to be the most ignominious defeat the United States ever had. We were humiliated by basically a country that had no real air force or navy or any of any sort, and basically a rural peasant population that had managed to defeat both the French imperialists and then the U.S. Never call them imperialists, whatever they are, the U.S. warmongers or whatever they were, that you guys were. But nonetheless, they managed to do this. And at the time, there were these dire warnings. Oh, now if we don't stay in Vietnam and we don't win in Vietnam, they're going to be in San Diego. We're going to have to fight them on our shores, which was absurd since they had no way of getting to San Diego, other than if they could have hooked a commercial flight, I guess, out of Tokyo or something if they got over there. But the reality is, the American media, the American political class, and the American public, thanks to those two groups, believed all this and believed it was worth the loss of 59,000 American lives and somewhere between 4 and 6 million, no one's really clear, of Indo-Chinese people who died, mostly innocent civilians who had nothing to do with organizing the war or pursuing it. And so I want to go there right now because today Chinese and the Vietnamese are meeting in Hanoi, Chinese delegation, and they're at a time. What are they meeting about? Not how to conquer the United States militarily, but try to how to sell stuff to us and deal with Trump's tariffs, and to see whether these two countries that were really not that close during the Vietnam War had a lot of issues. And after the war, when we lost, they didn't go attack the United States. Vietnam went to war with China over their border, and they're still fighting over some islands in South China Sea. But nonetheless, the real issue is now is that they're both fiercely efficient and effective at capitalism, even though they still have communist parties and power. And they're a threat economically, evidently, to the United States under President Trump, who feels he has to put these big tariffs on them. And so now, Trump is angry that they're conspiring against him, but he admits at least that their motives are those of capitalists rather than communists. What is your take on this? Does this kind of mock the way you spent your life as the CIA's leading analyst, or one of the, I guess, the top analysts on both Russia and Russia's relation to the United States, but also its relation to Vietnam and China, right?
Yeah. Yes, Bob. I was in the thick of it. This fear of communism spreading. I think it was Albert Einstein that said the most ridiculous phenomenon we'll look back on as saying what the U.S. did out of inordinate fear of communism. The war was over. The French had lost, and then they won. Right. Then they wanted to get Indochina back. We wanted to support the good guys in France against the French communists. And so, yeah, we'll help you. France sends one of their war heroes, General Leclerc. They've named a tank after him, okay? Leclerc out to Indochina, say, General, you tell us what it would take to win back Indochina. He spent 6 months and he wires back, it would take 500,000 troops, and even then we could not do it. Okay. They tried anyway. Dien Bien Phu, they got a real bloody nose. They said, help, help. And the Americans said, oh my God, these are all communists. The ones in France, we got to help them. The ones in China, well, the domino effect, they're not going to come to San Diego just yet, but they're certainly going to go down, take the rest of Cambodia and Vietnam and then Indonesia and God knows what else. Most people were persuaded to believe that because they were uneducated, because they hadn't read Richard Falk's book. It was a civil war, for God's sake. Ho Chi Minh, yeah, was a communist, but I mean his declaration of independence was almost identical to ours. Okay, and he had the upper hand. Now, I was watching it from a Russian perspective. Okay, and I learned very gradually that the Russians had very little influence in Hanoi.
You mean as a CIA analyst? You
That's
were.
right. My portfolio, I looked into this, Bob. My first job was Sino-Soviet relations, and before you knew it, we were at war in Vietnam. And one of the key questions was, how interested in the Russia are the Russians here? Do they intend to take over Vietnam? And how much support would they give them? And my God, would they help us out? Now, Averill Harriman, who had been ambassador to Russia, of course, he knew all about what the U.S. could do with respect to the Russians. And he said to everyone who would listen in Washington, this is the height of the war. Look, in the final analysis, the Russians will, quote, use their influence with the North Vietnamese in Hanoi and pull our chestnuts out of the fire, period, end quote. Now, the more I looked at the situation, I realized, well, there was a fallacy there. The Russians had no influence in Hanoi. Why? Because they sold the North Vietnamese down the river at Geneva in 1945. North Vietnamese didn't need Russian weaponry. They had lots of weaponry themselves, and they had some from the Chinese. So the whole shibboleth that the Russians are going to take over Southeast Asia or the Chinese, who had waged a war with Vietnam before and waged another one after the U.S. Vietnam. Anyhow, what happened was they became so enveloped in this domino theory notion that they didn't. All they wanted to do was win, and so they concocted a story. It's called the Tonkin Gulf incidents. Now, that was at a point where U.S. Special Forces were raiding the North Vietnamese coast, and they had certain protection from U.S. destroyers offshore. The North Vietnamese took it into their head to try to hit one of those destroyers on the 2nd of August, 1964. They almost did. It got out of town real quick. Next, 2 nights later, they tried to hit another destroyer. That never happened, okay? What the people in Honolulu at the at PACCOM, the Pacific Command, radioed to Washington. Oh my God, they're attacking another destroyer! And then quickly came the word, oh no, this was an anomaly. No attack on the 4th of August. Okay, we all knew that. Now I went down to the 5th floor where the North Vietnamese analyst was, and I said, Tom, my God, that's great. You got a daily bulletin to write now? He says, yeah, I already wrote it. I said, where is it? He said, uh, the head of current intelligence came down to my office. I'd seen him just once before. He never came down to the 5th floor, and he said, Tom Latimer, can that. We're not going to run that because it says there was no incident on the 4th of August. And so Tom said, well, look, we have to tell the president. Look, we've already heard from the president. He wants to use this to get authorization to win a war. That's how it went down. Next morning, and I know this from the mouth of McGeorge Bundy himself, who was the National Security Advisor, after all this went down, He and McNamara and others appeared on what used to be a really good talk show, McNeil Lehrer. Okay, so McNeil says to uh, Mick George Bundy, Mac, what happened there on the morning of the fifth? You knew there was no incident. So when the president, what'd you do? Mac, well, the president's a really big guy, and he came in and I was in the West Wing, and he stood over my shoulder. He said, "Okay, Mac, you're going to go sell that resolution now?" And I said, "Sir, it's not clear that anything happened, much less an attack on those destroyers yesterday." And he said, Mac, are you going up there to sell that resolution or are you not? McNeil, what'd you say? Well, I went up and I briefed them and told them about the incident that happened, didn't happen to happen on the 5th. That story, that was the Tonkin Gulf resolution. That's how weird it was that Johnson felt he had to have a pretext to declare war and start bombing the North. So this is 64. Fulbright, who was a senator then, who was better than most senators, later said this was the biggest state mistake he made because that was 64. As you pointed out, Bob, the whole thing didn't completely end until exactly 50 years ago today, or this month at least, in 1975. Okay, count them, 11 years. I know a lot more about these intelligence input, how it was prostituted and then it was clear, and the troubles we had in telling the administration what was going on, the problems I had in telling the administration, look, Russia has no influence in Hanoi. And they said, well, yeah, but they gave him a couple of SAM, surface to air missile sites. Yeah, that was because they can't let the Chinese outpace them for leadership in the communist movement. This is the only communist country under attack. They had to give them something. Okay, they gave them a few. It doesn't matter. They're not going to pull your chestnuts out of the fire, Mr. Harriman. Now, who would listen to me? What was I, 25 years old? All these very knowledgeable people like Harriman. Oh, no, no, no. We can get the Russians to bail us out. I spent the night of my third child's birth, November 15th, 1966, in the waiting room when I should have been in the labor room helping my wife, writing a memo to get up to the top. Say, look, you're being misled by these guys that say Russia has influence. Anyhow, it got so bad that I went public, and I wrote an article in what was used to be a scholarly journal, Problems of Communism, June 1967. You can read all about it. Later, I learned that some of the Vietnamese analysts were telling the president what he wanted to hear, that there was hope, that maybe these Air Force generals or something, maybe, and the honest guys were being kept out of the loop until the very end. And this is it. I want to spell this one out because it speaks chapter and verse. There was a fellow named Sam Adams. He actually was a descendant of John Adams, about 32 times removed. He was bright as hell. He's out of Harvard, went into the Navy, went to Harvard Law School, didn't like law school, came down the same day I did to Washington at the behest of John Kennedy, who said, hey, you think it got something special to give to the country? Do it. He was in the same junior officer trainee course that I was in. Okay, we were going to lead the agency in 10 years. Now, what happened was they assigned Sam, please, Sam, count up how many enemy are in Vietnam, in the south of Vietnam. And Sam said, don't you have those figures? Well, no, we only have what the French had about 1956. so Sam was a terrific guy. He had this big table. He collected all this information from overhead, from intercepts, from POW reports, and he found out that they had almost 600,000 men under arms in South Vietnam. Okay. And then he went to Saigon and he found out they were holding only 299,000 troops. It couldn't go over 299. Sam learned what a farce that was, came back to Washington, got all the intelligence agencies to approve his figures, in August of 67, except the Army. The Army went with Westmoreland. And we took that estimate to Richard Helms, the head of the CIA. And Helms said, God, whew, hey, Sam, you have to realize that my first job, and this is a quote, Bob, this is meaningful. Helms, my first job is to protect the agency. And there's no way I can protect the agency by getting in a pissing match with the U.S. Army at war. So we're not going to run your estimate. We'll go with Westmoreland's figures. There can't be more than 299,000. Guess what happened? August, September. 4 months later, the major attack at Tet, late January, early February 1968 now, where every town, hamlet, village, and city was attacked by, guess how many Viet Cong? 600,000, 500, 600,000. So what happened then? What happened then was there were leaks. And this is really interesting too. The first leak said Westmoreland is coming back, and he was back already, and he's going to ask for 208,000 more troops to turn the tide, to go up to the border of North Vietnam, maybe even go up to the border of China and take Cambodia. That all he needs is 208,000 troops. LBJ was willing to give him those troops until that that was leaked to the Times, New York Times. That was mid March, 1968. Then Dan Ellsberg made his first leak. He leaked Sam Adams's figures. There were 500 to 600,000 troops. Okay, now those two leaks, LBJ said in mid March of 1968, they prevented me from continuing this war. Nobody believes me anymore. Besides, Bobby Kennedy and McCarthy are making great strides. I'm not going to even run again. He announces that on the 31st of March. So, what's the deal here? Well, with respect to intelligence, uh, LBJ was told the things he wanted to hear. God, it was awful, okay? He didn't listen to people who wanted to tell him the truth. And then when they finally told him the truth after Tet, he said, This is awful. I won't survive politically. I quit. I won't run again. That's how meaningful it was politically for LBJ. Of course, when Humphrey came in, it went on, even after LBJ. But it was a terrible experience because I saw that at the very top level, Helms, for example, and of course Westmoreland. Westmoreland had a deputy. His name was Creighton Abrams. We've named the tank after him too. Okay, Creighton Abrams. He was his deputy. Now, in August of 1967, I was having lunch with Sam Adams, and I said, "Sam, doesn't make any sense. Why is Westmoreland exaggerating the number of enemy there? I mean, usually, or why is he? I'm sorry. Why is he keeping it down, keeping the number down?" And Sam said, "Well, look, uh, they're killing so many thousand every week, right? And the press in Saigon is smart enough to do arithmetic or subtraction. And if he admitted now that there are twice as many people as he's saying, well, that one, he prefers to come back and ask for 208,000 more. That's what's going on." I said, "Oh, come on, Sam." Ray, this morning, it was first week of August, I read a notice. Notice? That's a cable that comes in for no distribution except to the director. Sam could go up and read it because he was a specialist on the area. Okay. What did it say? It was from Creighton Abrams. And this is a quote. Quote, "We can't possibly go with the higher figures by Sam Adams because we've been projecting an image of progress in this war, and there's no caveat we could adduce to prevent the press in Saigon from drawing an erroneous and gloomy conclusion. Period." End quote. Now, the only thing remarkable about that is that Abrams put it to writing. I mean, he was a very good tank commander, not so smart politically. And I thought at the time, and this is the last thing I'll say, Bob, I thought at the time, my God, McGovern, if you get a hold of that cable and take it down to the New York Times bureau in Washington. Maybe it could help stop this damn war, okay? Now, did I do that? Well, number one, it would have been hard to do. But number two, I didn't have the guts. I wasn't a whistleblower in those days. I was a dad with 5 kids to educate and a mortgage and all that kind. I had used all those adjectives and all those evasive descriptions to say, no, wait till later, Ray, when you get higher in the pecking order here. Then the next time this happens, you'll be there. Don't do it now. And so I didn't do it, even if I could have. I'm not sure I could have. Sam and I remain real good friends. Sam was a terrific guy. He talked to Cy Hirsch on the slide, but he wouldn't divulge any classified information. They finally fired him, okay, and he died prematurely at age 54 from a heart attack. I think he never got over it, what they did to him and how he had come down to Washington to do what Kennedy asked all of us to do, did his best, succeeded in evincing the truth, and then was stymied by people whose cachet was power and bowing to the president's power. It was a terrible episode, and all this business about Congress pulling the rug out from under the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army lied through its teeth then, and in many cases, it's lying through its teeth now.